Torah, Perek Hey, we're towards the end of Perek Hey. Says the Rambam, Perek Vav, Perek Hey Halacha Yud. V'chol Talmud Chachamim, Shedeosav Mechuvanos, Eino Medaber V'fnei Mishu Gadol Mimenu B'Chachma. Any Talmud Chachamim, never heard that phrase. Not just Talmud Chacham, Talmud Chachamim. If somebody's a Talmud Chachamim, that his Deos are Mechuvanos, meaning if somebody has his head on right, correctly, he does not speak in front of somebody who's greater than him in Chachma. Even though he's not my Rabbi. Right? If I'm in the presence of a great rabbi, I'm not going to open my mouth in front of him because I know he has, what do you want to hear what I have to say? You have to listen to what he has to say. So that's also a midah. I think it's one of the 48 midos. Shatorah Niknes Bahen. Right, one of the 48 midos in Kinyan Torah, in the last parak of in the Brisa of Pirkei Avos, about not talking in front of someone, who's supposed to be talking in front of you. Okay. Said the Rambam, Harava Muvak Sharat Salam Chalak Fodu B'Chol Drama Elu, O Be'echad Mehem L'Chol Tamidav. If a Rebbe wants to be mochal on his kavod, O Le'echad Mehem Harishus Biyado, a Rebbe can be mochal on his kavod. V'yav B'Shemachal Chayv Atam L'Hadro. V'yafilu B'Shah Shemachal. And even if he's mochel, the Talmud has to be mahader him, even as he's being mochel. Meaning, if the Rebbe says, no, like the Rebbe walks into the room and everybody stands up, and everybody's like, no, sit down. The Talmidim still have to do something. The Talmidim can't just say, oh, Rebbe's mochel, okay, we'll treat him as one of the guys. They'll just be like, me and Rebbe. So it should be me and Rebbe, a certain closeness, but there always has to be that invisible line that should exist between a Rebbe and a Talmud and a rabbi and a balabas. There has to be closeness, but there should be certain an invisible line. Okay, one more halacha, and then we'll get into Chazara. Kishem shal talmidim chayavim bechad harav tzorach lachabed is talmidav ulekarva. Wow, just like a Talmud has a chiyuv to be machabed as Rebbe, so too the Rebbe has a chiyuv to be machabed his talmidim ulekarvan, and to bring them close to Hashem. Kach amru chachamim yikavo talmidcha chaviv alecha kishal chavercha. The covet of your Talmud has to be beloved to you. V'tzarach adam lizar b'talmidav ula ohavan. Person has to be very careful with his talmidim, to respect them and to love them. The Rambam says, Shehem habonim hamahanim ba'olam hazeh ula olam haba. That's a great Rambam. There has to be not just a respect between a Rebbe and a Talmud and a Rebbe. There has to be a certain love that you have to have between a Talmud and a Rebbe and a Talmud. Again, and that's what the Rebbe has to be out for the Talmidim, to be masur, to give, to be loyal to the Talmidim, to give to the Talmidim, and be focused on the going up of the Talmidim. Right? The Gemara says in one place, there's jealousy to everybody except for a child and a student. A person's not jealous of his student or his child. The parent's child outshines the parent. That's the greatest nachas in the world. The greatest nachas, that the child should become the gadol hador and the greatest person. And the Talmud also. If the Talmud becomes the gadol hador, that's what the Rebbe wants, because there's a piece of the Rebbe in the Talmud, and there's a piece of the parent in the child. So there's no jealousy because that's me. That's me. And therefore, one has to recognize, one has to try to develop relationships with a Rebbe, with a rabbi, with wherever you connect to in this way, to have this growth connection as time goes. We only have one halacha left in the parak, so let's just do it. Hatalmidim osivim chachmas harav umarchivan libo. Students add to the wisdom of the Rav, umarchivan libo, and widen his heart. Amr chachamim, like the Gemara says in two Masechtas. Without looking, who knows? Two Masechtas. Amr chachamim, harbe chachama lahmati michaveira, Yosef Rabosai, umitamida Yosef mikulan. My students more than anybody. Yosef, you know one of them. Which Masechta?
Rosh Hashanah.
Close. What were you learning? You always ask me questions.
Rosh Hashanah, isn't it?
It's in Rosh Hashanah? Okay, maybe. I don't remember. I remember two other Masechtas. Maybe it's in three. Anybody know? I'll look it up.
Is it in Sukkah?
I think
Sukkah?
one is in Makos. One is in Makos. I thought that's what you were going to, Yosef. Sorry. So Makos, and one was in Tainus. I think it's Makos Daf Yud. My new computer, you don't hear me when I go to the side. That's what I heard. So I have to speak back in front of you. Yud. Tainus Daf Zayin, Makos Daf Yud. So that is the Makos, and that's what the Rambam says. That students make the rabbi, more wise because he has to prepare. He has to prepare for the students, and the more motivated the students, the harder the Rebbe has to prepare. When I prepare sugyas, I think about these 15 windows on the screen, and it's a mechayev. It makes me here it's the late afternoon, but some of you it's the morning, so you're really on the ball. The morning is always strongest, so always got to be careful to make sure that the sugyas are clear, and that's what the Gemara says. Ukishem, and the last line is the beautiful. Ukishem she'etz katan madliket hagadol. When you light a fire, you use a little match. A little match lights the big fire. Kach talmid katan mechaded es harav. Until out of his questions come unbelievable wisdom. Those last two halachas are worth it to do all this Hilchos Talmud Torah for those last two halachas. The love that has to be constant between the Rebbe and the Talmud, and that the Talmud is Mosa. The Talmud is like the Eitz Katan, like the little match that's going to light the fire. And that is how we have to look at Torah and the relationship between us. Okay, let us get back into Chazara. Okay, I sent you out the hopefully the packets. Hopefully, if Ellie sent them out, you have some of them. You sent the rest of them out yet or not yet? Okay, so you have there. Also shows again, just as an idea. I remember I once had a Rebbe that had notes. I remember it. It is a little bit like, do you want to give out your notes or not? But I want to share the notes because the Torah is ours to share. Somebody came to my house today. They called up this morning. They said, "Can we come to you to do a 1-minute video?" I'm like, "What about?" They said, "Partners in Torah." I said, "Great. What's Partners in Torah?" So they said, "We have these chavrusas and throughout the world, and sometimes religious, not religious, and we just want you to talk about it." I'm like, "Okay." So they came over. They set up this whole tripod and video and lighting and that fluffy microphone that looks like fancy with a lot of stuff coming out from it. And they're like, "Okay, talk." I'm like, they're going to say something. I'm like, "Okay, what do you want me to talk about?" They're like, "I know, talk about Torah and talk about how, they you don't have to be like the Rosh Bahag to be a chavrusa. All you have to know is Aleph Beis, and you could teach somebody who's sitting there in Idaho who doesn't know anything, who wants to be connected. Everybody could be a Rebbe." So I don't know what. So right before I was like, "Okay, give me 20 seconds." I was thinking, I'm like, what am I going to say in 20? So I thought, Kodesh Baruch Hu helped, that Torah is called, good back pockets. It was in my back pocket, that's why I knew it. That the Torah is called a Morasha, not a Yerusha, right? Yeish Nochlin. Torah is called a Morasha, not a Yerusha. Torah Tzibalanu Moshe, Morasha Kilas Yaakov. What's the difference between a Morasha and a Yerusha? So the Rav says Yerusha is an inheritance, as we've spoken about. Morasha is a heritage. What's the difference between a Yerusha and a Morasha? Yerusha is monetary. I got it, and I can do whatever I want with it. That's what a Yerusha is. A Morasha is a heritage. You can't do whatever you want with a heritage. You get something, and it's your job to pass it to the next generation. And it's your job to care for it, to watch over it, to add to it, to clean it, and then to pass it over. Because a heritage is not something personal. A heritage is something that we're part of a chain, but we give it to the next generation. So that's why it's our job. So I said everybody is part of this heritage, And no matter who you are, you have the heritage of the Torah, the Morashah, and you can, pass it over to any Jew in the world to connect to Hashem and connect to Torah, etc. But that's the Morashah and Yerusha that we think about as we learn Torah together. Okay, so let's get back to our sugya. So I gave you the list. You know what? I'll send you a picture so you have it just in front of you. So let me just get the Rabbi Rosner Shiur. That's a good one. Second. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry. What is this? I'll send you a picture of the 15 titles. So you have this in front of you. The topics that we did. And we are up to number 3. We're up to number 3. So you have in front of you, you could print that. That's the table of contents of the notes. Anyway, so we are up to topic number 3. We did the first 2, and that is the Gemara that comes up at the beginning of the parak. Again, we're not going to chazar every detail. I'm just going to give the Rashi Prakim, and then feel free to review it yourself. And if I'm not online, WhatsApp me questions, ask questions, and then I'll try to get back to you. Again, so we spoke about the relationship. The Gemara spoke about the relationship between different parties in Yibum. The son, the potential son, takes the place of the dead father. The brother takes the place of his dead brother. So we saw different formulations in the Rishonim. This was more of a detail how to understand the Gemara. We spoke about Tosfos, the Rashbam, and the Baal Mark. But we spoke about fascinating was the Gemara in Yevamos. Again, I'm not going to chazar the specific details of the formulations. Feel free to do that yourself. You have the notes in front of you. But we saw again some of the salient points. The Gemara in Yevamos and Naf Chav Daled, where the Gemara says there that there is no exception to the rule. Ein hamikra yosei midei pshuto. Pshat can never be rejected. There's pshat and there's drash and there's remes and there's sod. There's 4 different levels, but pshat is always there except for one. There's one exception to the rule, and that is this pasuk by Yibum. V'haya b'char asher teled. The b'char asher teled, even though it sounds like the son that's going to be born, but really it's referring to the brother. Really it's referring to the brother. The oldest brother should do Yibum. Right? Except for there. So we just noted. So why did the Torah say that? Why did the Torah mislead us? Right, to think as if it's the son and not the brother, unless somehow the brother mama steps into the shoes, right? And that's why it says it's ki'ilu the son who we know steps into the shoes, but maybe that's the emphasis of the Torah. Good. Then we spoke about the mitzvah of Yibum in the second half of the sugya. We spoke about how Yibum works actually, because we noted that Yibum, the Mishnah tells us, doesn't need any kavanah. Let's say somebody's being mizana, and they think they're being mizana, but it ends up being the Yavama. And all of a sudden they do Yibum. What's the halacha? They're married, mazel tov. Right? He thinks he's doing znus, but they're married. So the Minchas Chinuch we mentioned as a huge chiddush to be aware of, that it could be that your yotze, the kinyan of Yibum worked, but the mitzvah of Yibum was not fulfilled. That's a big chiddush that the Minchas Chinuch says, but the Gemara says they're married. The Gemara says they're married in that case. So what does that mean that they're married? He didn't have any kavanah. So the physical act of Yibum works as the kinyan. But still we asked, what type of Maisa is Yibum? And we saw the importance, Rabbi Chanan, that we had seen earlier in the year also, that there are 2 types of actions that we have in the world, in the halachic world. A Maisa where you are in control of the chalos, or a Maisa where you do the physical action and the chalos comes memela. But you're not causing the chalos. That was Rabbi Chanan in Siman Ayin Vav. What he calls koach ha'adam or koach ha'maisa. Kiddushin, you cause it. Shchita, you don't cause it. You just do it, you shech the animal. And memela, the heter shchita kicks in. Those are 2 types of actions. We saw that. If you could review that again, that's a great Rabbi Chanan. He gives many different nafkaminas Tnai, and Shliach, and Edom the Moshe Darashina Shalom, many different examples. But we said, what about Yibum? What about Yibum? So we said there's another nafkamina, right? Is Yibum in category 1 or category 2? I do the Yibum and I cause the marriage, or I do the physical act, and Mamela Yibum happens. Well, my nafkamina, Eid. Says Rabbi Chanan, Eidei Kiyum is another nafkamina about what type of action it is. If you're in control and you're causing the chalos, then you need Eidim on that. Eidei Kiyum, marriage, divorce. Shchita doesn't need Eidim. So does Yibum need Eidim? That's a machlok rishon. Whether you need Eidim for Yibum. So we said maybe that's good for the machlokas about how do you understand Yibum? Is Yibum an action that I do? I married the sister-in-law or not? I do the physical act, and then Mamela, the Yibum happens without my focus. Either way, that was an important discussion of Yibum. We related that to the machlokas Tosfos and the Balamar in that sugya that we're not going to review right now. I'm just, again, trying to review the yisodos of each sugya, not going through each of the details. Again, in life, halavai, we should remember every single detail of every single shita of every single sugya. But at least the two or 3 points, and maybe 1 or 2 shitas from each sugya to take with us. 1 or 2 shitas from each sugya. We review everything, but 1 or 2 are like, wow, this shita. Like that minchas chinuch, that's a takeaway. That's a takeaway shita of from the sugya. What did that Rabbi Chanan? 2 types of maisim. These are shas sources. These aren't just limited for this sugya sources. So again, that's all. That Gemara in Yavamis. Eina mikra yosim de pshuto. There's no exceptions except for 1. Right? These are the types of sources that we try to, when you're chazra your notes, maybe like put a star like next to the shitos that are the ones you want to like really remember. So then afterwards you could like review the stars. Like, oh yeah, this and this and this. So if you don't remember all 150 shitos that we did, at least the major ones you could take we could take with us. Okay, then we spoke about Yerushas Habal. Yerushas Habal. Levi, you with me? You excited? We're learning Torah together. Yaakov, you there? Baruch Hashem. Eli, Avrami, we're all good? Ephraim, Yosef, Yehuda. Eli, Avram, Shlomo, Mikey, Netanel. We're all good. We're all here. We're all focused. Okay, Torah is binding us. Torah is binding us. Here we go. Yerushas Habal. So we noted that Yerushas Habal, even conceptually, is very different. It's the only Yerusha that's not a blood relative. The only Yerusha that you choose. The Gemara has a couple of sources for Yerushas Habal. We asked a couple of questions based on a couple of Gemaras for Yerushas Habal. Right? If the Baal buys the field, by the Gemara in Erechin on Daf Chafei, if the Baal buys the field, does it go back to the woman, or is that called an acher? Right, that was the suffix of the. I think that's the suffix of the Gemara. But either way, the Gemara has the following. We had the following chakira about how to understand Yerushas Habal. Right. On the one hand, you might say, well, it's regular Yerusha, meaning it didn't start off as regular Yerusha. He has to choose to be married. Once he's married, it turns out to be regular Yerusha, and you have to somehow explain the difficulties. The Ran had this lashon that it's like you're the regular Yerusha. The problem would be that mishmush doesn't work. That's the big problem with saying it's like a regular Yerusha, which means if the husband dies first, the Yerusha doesn't go through him. Usually when somebody dies, the Yerusha goes through him to his descendants, to his relatives. And here it doesn't. Okay, that's a problem that can be answered. But then we said maybe there's a second idea in Yerushas Habal, and that's what we call she'er. She'er basar. She'er zu ishto, ishto kugufo. Somehow a husband and wife become one. V'hayu l'basar echad. That's what Tosfos says. Remember that Tosfos? Tosfos said this before. Tosfos said on Kuf Tes Kuf Yud Gimel Kibasar echad. They're considered she'erus. So that's the second approach that you could have. That's that Rashi and the Rashbam, Rashi and the Ramban and Bereshis. Remember, v'chayil basar echad. That's a good one to remember. That Rashi and the Ramban. That's a good Sheva brachas, Rashi and the Ramban to remember. But again, that's the they join together as a unit, and that's why he yarshins her. And ironically, we said according to this, really there's a stronger connection when they're alive than when they're dead. Yerusha, you only get the stuff after the person dies. Here, he has an even stronger connection to it maybe before his wife dies. But that's the second approach to Yerusha Sabal. But then we said maybe there's a third idea, especially if it's Durabanan. We said there's a machlokas. Yerusha Sabal, Daraisa, Durabanan. If you say it's Durabanan, so does that mean it's Yerusha Midurabanan? Or maybe it's just Zechus Ishus. It's a Zechus Mamoni in the marriage. Nothing to do with Yerusha. Nothing to do with She'er Basar. It's a Zechus in the Ishus. It's a monetary right that the husband has. Nothing more than that. That's what the Rambam seems to say. And maybe this was 2 days in Baalei Tosfos, because we saw 2 different Tosfos and whether Yerusha Sabal is called Yeish Lo or Ein Lo Iker Min HaTorah. So we said that could be about our issue. One final point we made in the sugya, again in terms of this, and that is we noted if you say Yerusha is Durabanan, the Rambam seems to say Yerusha Sabal is Durabanan. So how could the Gemara even contemplate a nafkamina on the Daraisa level? The husband is considered her and not an acher. So we got into a little bit the Rabbanans affecting Daraisa definitions. And the Rabbanan have the power to affect the Daraisa definitions. Again, if you remember that Gemara, that if you sit in a puzzle sukkah, midirabanan, the language of Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai, lo kiyamta mitzvah sukkah miyamecha. You'll never fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. Well, it's only puzzle d'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan might have the power to knock out the mitzvah of sukkah, or we said the Menchas Chinuch. What about Kiddush, Birchas Hamazon? If I make up my own words, the Rabbanan told me how to fulfill this mitzvah d'Oraisa. What if I make up my own words? Am I yotze at all? I had a similar discussion. But then we said the one that's of other details, but that's from that sugya. We spoke about kofar a little bit also, and ro'ui, why the Baal doesn't take ro'ui. So we saw there were a couple opinions in the Gemara about that, and we spoke about that's the only Tosfos Talmud Rabbeinu Tam that we did the whole year. That was the last source that we did in this topic of Yerusha Sabal, where he seems to say, uses the lashon of, well, the husband and the wife are like one. So if the wife gets injured, that has a special effect on the husband's chiyuv. So if you remember that, again, we're not going to review the detail, but that was an important shita in our that we discussed. Okay. Good. The next 2 topics were really Shas topics, exciting topics. Nitna Torah v'nischat halacha. All right, the Torah was given, and halacha is renewed. The halacha is renewed. So we saw, what does this do? We saw the Rambam, the Bnei Filchos Avil, where the Rambam says the brothers sat Shiva for Yaakov Avinu. Shiva is only 1 day according to what we hold, Midaraisa. Nitna Torah v'nischat halacha. What does that mean? The Torah was given and the halacha is renewed. The Yerushalmi says you can't learn halacha from before Matan Torah. But what do you mean? We learn plenty of halachas from before Matan Torah. We learn plenty of halachas, right? You can't ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, right? By Lavan and Yaakov and you're allowed to lie. Mutar l'shanas b'bnei Hashalom. We learn from Hashem and Avram Avinu and Sarah. So we learn a lot. We learn Zvizas Makdim al Mitzvahs from Avraham. So that's a question that we'll come back to. The makar in this sugya is Rambam Pirush Mishnayos and Chulin. Put a star, that's the one to star. The Rambam and the Pirush Mishnayos and Chulin on Daf Kuf, explaining the Machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim about Gid Anosha of a non-kosher animal. Remember, the Rambam says everything we do today is not because Abraham or Noach or Yaakov. It's all because of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe gave us 613, not 606 with 7 from before. All mitzvahs that we have to do today is because of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the Rambam Shita. And therefore, even if the brothers did not eat Gid Anosha, doesn't matter to us. For us, everything is renewed. You can't learn halacha. The source of our halachic Masorah is from Maimed Har Sinai. That is the Rambam, Pirush Mishnayos and Chulin on Daf Kuf. And this, we said, that's the Rambam in Hilchos Avel. Shiva before Matan Torah is different than Shiva after Matan Torah. And Tefillah, we said, how the Rambam could quote both Tefillah Keneged Avos and Tefillah Keneged Tmidim. The Avos is the history of the mitzvah. Tmidim is why we daven. But again, it could be both, because one's the history of the mitzvah, and one is why we daven. That's what the Rav Soloveitchik had quoted, and the Maratz Chayes and others. We saw where this phrase comes from. Nitna Torah v'Tzchach Shalach. We saw that by Tumas Yoledes. The Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Lamed Hey, right? That's where the phrase comes from. That it could be that. Remember, the Abaya said there, Abaya Ravasi, I forgot who said what, but the discussion there, that whether day 8 of Mila is connected to Tumas Yoledes, and the Gemara says, maybe not. Nitna Torah v'Tzchach Halacha. Then it wasn't, but now it is. Now it is. And then we added that in the Rambam, it's Meduyik, that even Har Sinai changed it for Bnei Noach. Because the Rambam says that a Ben Noach has to do his mitzvahs l'shma. If a Ben Noach does his mitzvahs just because it makes sense to him, he doesn't get the schar. Because he also, something happened in the world at Har Sinai. That was the Maratz Chayes' idea. It wasn't just the Jews. Even the Sheva mitzvahs Bnei Noach took on a new character at Har Sinai, because Hashem said this is the Jewish religion and this is the non-Jewish religion. And that's why all the nations were shaking at Har Sinai, because it affected them too. It wasn't just from the Jews. Fine. That was all part 1. Everybody still there? Everybody hanging out? Everybody good? So we said, so how do you learn anything from before Matan Torah then? Right? We learn a lot of halachas from before Matan Torah. So one idea is that it's all derech eretz kind of halachas. It's not like bona fide tumah v'tara and kudshim. It's all like nice rizah magdim l'mitzvahs. Don't mix simchas. That's one idea. Or a second idea, and this was the creative idea from Rabbi Yosef Engel in the Beis HaOtzar, who says maybe it's like that Gemara in Gittin on Daf Samach. The Gemara there be familiar with this machlokas. Right? The Gemara's machlokas, how the Torah was given. Torah chasuma nitna or Megillah nitna. Was the Torah given at Har Sinai and then the rest of it at the end of the 40 years? Or was it given little by little? Every time a story happened, Moshe wrote that in the Torah and gave that to Bnei Yisrael. That's a machlokas. So what's that machlokas about? Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, is Ma'amad Har Sinai, was it a one-moment thing or was it a process? If you say it was written piece by piece, then maybe what you're saying is that Ma'amad Har Sinai is a process. That's after Matan Torah. So Rabbi Yosef Engel suggested is that maybe you have the same idea before Matan Torah. There was a process. And maybe some of the halachas that we learned from before Matan Torah is not really before Matan Torah. It's during Matan Torah. Maybe Matan Torah went from the Avos all the way until Har Sinai. And maybe that's the machlokas in Shabbos. In Shabbos, later on, Daf Kuf Mem Hey, when did Bnei Yisrael lose their zuhama, their spiritual impurity? From Yaakov or from Har Sinai? Maybe that machlokas is about this issue, fascinating, about whether Ma'amad Har Sinai was a process that started earlier or not. That was and therefore you can learn from before Har Sinai because it's not really before Har Sinai. And then finally, the last piece in this sugya, this was a really fun topic, was if you say it was a process, then that relates to the following question: what status did the Avos have before Har Sinai? What status did they? Were they B'nai Noach or not? Or were they Yisraelim? We saw different days in Tosfos. We saw Tosfos in Babasra Kuf Mem Aleph, Tosfos in Babasra Nun Ches, whether Matami Ba'oel. Right? We saw Tosfos seemed to say that Tosfos did not say that they were fully B'nai Noach. The Ritva said they were Dino Ki Yisrael, they were Jews. The Nemuki Yosef said no, they were Goyim. So we said somewhere maybe some formulations are in the middle. Maybe they were, and each of these are different. Super B'nai Noach, pre-Yisrael, mini Yisrael. And all of these are different words, but they all capture different ideas. But how you look at the status of the Avos before Maimed Har Sinai. We saw the Gemara in Kiddushin that called Esav a Yisrael Mumar. He's a Yisrael Mumar. So again, we saw the Moshav Zakanim. Maybe that was exactly the machlokas between Yosef and his brothers. Moshav Zakanim is a collection of Bali Atosfos. Right? Maybe this was a machlokas about the brothers were saying we're to get the Torah. So it's us or what you're doing. Right? And Yosef was saying no. So again, maybe that was the machlokas, very, very creative. But either way, if we say that there was a process of Kabbalas Torah before, then l'chora, they weren't just B'nai Noach. They had to have at least been mini or pre-Yisrael in order to say that there was a process of Kabbalas Torah. That was sugya number 5. Sugya number 6. Kal v'chomer. Is this helpful? This Chazara, these overall, they're helpful. It's not just too fast over the head. Okay. Kal v'chomer l'shchina. So we spoke about the concept of kal v'chomer. So again, without getting into details, but remember we said sometimes something looks like a kal v'chomer, but it's not really a kal v'chomer. This is one of those sources to star. The Kesef Mishnah at the beginning of Hilchos Tumas Meis. The Kesef Mishnah at the beginning of Hilchos Tumas Meis, where the Rambam says the Torah doesn't say daughter, it says granddaughter. The Torah doesn't say eating basar b'chalav, it says cooking basar b'chalav. And the Kesef Mishnah there says, I happen to give a punishment, they don't shemin adin. You can't punish based on a kal v'chomer. Says the Kesef Mishnah, sometimes something's not a kal v'chomer. It's what's called a gilui milsa. It's included from within. It's not an external, two different factors, A or B. When the Torah says granddaughter is usher, included in that is daughter. It's not a kal v'chomer to daughter. When the Torah says you can't cook basar b'chalav, included in that is eating basar b'chalav. Right? And maybe that's an Gemara. When the Torah says, if Hashem embarrasses you, so then including that is a one parent. Hashem is a double. Hashem is kilu equal to mother and father. So we mentioned that kal v'chomer is not always kal v'chomer. We use that to explain the Tosfos there. But then we went into Gzeira Shava and kal v'chomer. Right? These two Yesodos. They're unique. Rashi and Tosfos and Sukkah, also an important makar. Rashi and Tosfos and Sukkah Lamed Aleph. Right? What does each of them say? Right? Rashi says you can't darshan any midah except kal v'chomer. You need a Rebbe for everything except kal v'chomer. That's Rashi. And Tosfos says the opposite. No, you can darshan everything yourself except for Gzeira Shava. That's an important machlokas to be aware of. But what is it about Gzeira Shava that makes it unique, that makes it the strongest? Rashi in a few places says it's kilu, it's written explicitly by Gzeira Shava. Kilu nechtav betar, kilu nechtav, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So why do you need a Rebbe for? Says the Ramban. This is the Yesod. The Ramban says, when you have a big book, it's impossible not to repeat words. So obviously, words are going to be repeated. So how do you know which words to connect and which ones not to connect? It's impossible to know. That's why you need a Rebbe. Because what? You're just going to destroy the Torah. You can't leave it to anyone. So that's why you need a Rebbe, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu. But then 1 second. If you always need a Rebbe, how could there be a machlokas about Gzeira Shava? And how could there be stronger and weaker Gzeira Shavas? So the Ramban has the following Yesod. This is a crucial Ramban. It's said by all the Rishonim. The Ramban, the Ritva, the Meiri, but I think the Ramban is the earliest. The Ramban in Shoresh Beis says, Gzeira Shava means that the Rebbe told you the word to connect, but he didn't tell you which context to connect it to. There is some independence even by Gzeira Shava. And that's why the Gemara can have a machlokas. Compare it to A, compare it to B. Because Gzeira Shava comes from a Rebbe, but only the root of it comes from a Rebbe. What you connect it to is left for the Talmud left for the later Tanam Amoraim to use their own svara to connect it. But that's Gzeira Shava. That's why it's so strong. It represents Mesorah, goes back to a Rebbe. Kal v'chomer is the opposite. Kal v'chomer is pure logic. Everybody says you could darshan a kal v'chomer on your own. But because of that, it has a weakness that all the others do not have. And that is ein onshin min adin. You can't give a punishment based on a kal v'chomer. Why not? We saw 3 opinions. 3 opinions. Why can't you give four? I'm sorry. Four approaches. 4 reasons why ein onshin min adin. Number 1, because that's the rule. Okay, good. That's the rule. Number 2, because maybe the kal v'chomer is not good enough. You're saying if A gets punished, surely B, but maybe B is so chamur that the punishment is not going to help. It's so chamur, what's called gadol avano means so. Where did we see this? The Smag. The Smag says, if somebody gives some of their children to Molech, they're chayev misa. The Gemara says, if you give all your children to Molech, you're potter. Really? That doesn't make sense. Kal v'chomer. No, the Smag says, if you give all your children, forget it. Misa is not going to help you. Hashem will take care of you in the next world. So you can't just say a kal v'chomer to give this punishment. Sometimes the chomer might be so chamur. Or kasher zaman v'lo kasher asa. He actually killed an innocent person by lying in court. Kal v'chomer, kasher asa. No. So maybe that's why ein onshin min adin. Number 2. Number 3, there's a principle in Sanhedrin, v'tzilu ha'eda. We always try to save the person. So maybe part of that is also that you can't give a punishment based on the kal v'chomer. It's part of v'tzilu ha'eda, which is a sugya often that comes up in Sanhedrin. But the 4th one is the one that's important for us.
Rabbi,
why can't you give? Yeah.
Could that just be for Misa though?
It could also be for Malchus.
And isn't that concept specific to Misa?
Malchus is often, I don't remember exactly. Malchus is often put together with Misa. I have to check if you remember if it applies to Malchus also. But it at least applies to Misa.
Rabbi, the Kesef Mishnah put together Malchus and Mammon.
The Kesef Mishnah by Kasher Zamam put together Malchus and Mammon. I mean, the Rambam does. But the Kesef Mishnah explains that, yes. The Kesef Mishnah explains that. I'm trying to remember if in the Gemara, if there's any application specifically. I don't remember. But the 4th approach is maybe there's a percha. Because the kal v'chomer is based on pure logic, maybe my logic is wrong. How can you kill somebody based on that? How can you give Malchus based on that? Maybe you're wrong. It's not a Mesorah. So that is why kal v'chomer is different. So Gzeira Shava is unique, and kal v'chomer is unique. Good. We also saw Rabbeinu Gershom was at Shiva for his son who became a Meshumid, 7 days, 14 days for the physical body, for the spiritual. But that's interesting, Rabbeinu Gershom. Okay, then we got into the mitzvah of kavura.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
What does that mean? You said before that the Gzeira Shava was said by the Rabbi, and then the Talmud can interpret it as he wants, meaning the Rabbi said something in Shiur, and then the Talmud can either accept that or make his own.
No, I think
or the Rebbe just said this is the Gzeira Shava and do with you what you want.
The Rebbe left certain flexibility for the Talmud. He did not say. the Rebbe, let's say, transmitted that this word in Tumat Saras teaches us a halacha. This is the word that I got from Moshe Rabbeinu that is going to connect to a different area of halacha to learn something.
So why didn't the Rebbe just tell them what to learn from it?
Because every generation in the days of Chazal developed their own halacha and interpreted the Torah. Not nowadays, but in the days of the Tanaim, when they were still darshaning the Torah Sheba'al Peh, and they were still coming up with the principles. Right now, all the principles are set. But in the days of the Tanaim, they were still coming up with the principles, so there was flexibility. Okay. Now we got into the mitzvah of burial. We saw a steer in the Rambam, whether burial is a mitzvah d'oraisa, a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. We saw a couple of Gemaras about it. But we also there came up with a couple of ideas. How do you answer for the Rambam? Is it d'oraisa, is it d'Rabbanan? So some say the actual burial is d'oraisa, but all the preparation is d'Rabbanan. Some say for family members is d'oraisa, for everybody else is d'Rabbanan. What's going on here? What's the mitzvah of burial about? So we mentioned a fascinating suggestion by the Mitzvahs HaMelech, Rabbi Cement from Chicago. So he makes the Mizumin. We have 2 Chicagoans online here. So you know Rabbi Cement? Is he a big Rav there that people are familiar with?
I think he's like Rosh Hashiva and Tells or something.
He is a Rosh Hashiva and Tells?
Something like that. It's something in Tells, Rabbi, maybe.
It says on the Sefer, Azriel Cement. Does it say North Bernard? That's the name of the street, Chicago, Illinois. North Bernard. You know where that is? Yes, because his Haskamis are from Rav Gifter and from Avram Chaim Levine, both from Yeshivas Tel Chicago. So that gives it away. And from Rav Chaim Dov Keller, Tells. Okay. And from Rav Chaim Stein. And from others. Okay, yes. So he's connected to Tells. Good. So he quotes based on a medrash. The medrash says that burial is about returning the body to the ground. It came from the ground. Adam Arishon came from the ground. Now we're returning it. And the Ron quotes this on our sugya. What does this mean? Maybe kfur is not just chesed. Not just a chesed. Everything else is chesed. All the other mitzvahs ben adam l'chaveiro. Maybe there's an added element here. It's a completion of a cycle and of a circle. The body needs kfura. The guf needs to be returned to its origins. That's the din d'oraisa of kfura. The Rabbanan added on the additional mitzvah of chesed. The d'oraisa is that it needs, and that's why maybe there's a difference between dirt and non-dirt. We said, and maybe that's an idea. Who is the chiyuv of burial on? It's really on the person himself. But he can't do it because he's usually dead. That's what his family does it for him. But that's why we saw the medrash that in the midbar they dug their own graves every Tisha B'Av, and in the morning Moshe said, "Yibadlu achayim and amesim." What is that about? That's spooky. The answer is because really kfur is about the person himself. That's one idea of burial. 2. Number 1, chesed. Number 2, this idea of returning the guf to where it came from. Number 3, we saw the kobo, tashmishe kedusha. We saw the difference in Maseches Megillah between tashmishe mitzvah and tashmishe kedusha. Right? Anything that was connected to the ksav of Torah has to be buried. Tzitzis, shofar, sukkah does not have to be buried. Like the ksav of Torah has to be buried. So every Jewish body is connected to the ksav of Torah and has to be buried. Maybe that's where the burial comes from. Amazing suggestion. Number 3. Number 4, the Kabbalah also says it's a reflection of Tchias HaMesim. We believe that there's a future, so we don't just like throw the body out. We bury it for safekeeping, and then we believe in Tchias HaMesim. Believe in Tchias HaMesim. That's a 4th idea of Kavura. 4th idea of Kavura. Okay. We still have our head on. Should we continue? Or should we, are we okay? 1 or 2 more sugyas, or should we stop here and then next time? Should we continue a little bit? We're good? I have a thumbs up. Any thumbs down? No, we're good. Ellie, yes, you're giving me the yes, we're good? Okay. Let's just try to do 2 more then. Let's try to do 8 and 9, and then maybe next year we'll try to do the rest of them. 8 and 9. Masne, the two Tanai sugyas. Masne mashakasa batorah. Again, we're doing this very fast. Please spend the next week doing this. Spend the next week. We spent 2 months on this, did we? Right? Iyar, Tammuz, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. 3 months. Right? We spend almost 3 months on these sugyas. Right? So you might say, so why didn't we just spend 2 days? Why did we spend 3 months? We could have done it. No, but doing it in a different way. But in any case, Masna Mashakasav Batorah. Right? Being a t'nai against what it says in the Torah. So we spoke about a little bit how Yaakov Avinu didn't give the Bechorah to Ruvain. That was that Yad Ramah that we saw. And the Sfarno. I forgot to write the Yad Ramah. Those of you who have my notes. Yad Ramah is not written here. Okay. There are a couple of ha'aris. I send you my notes that were on the computer. I have a couple of ha'aris that were written in, but you have the 95% of the notes. So the Yad Ramah there says, how could Yaakov have switched? So he says, he quoted the same Yesod. The Avos didn't have to keep the Torah, but it was the opposite direction. But either way, our main question in Masala Mashkas Torah was, if somebody makes a Tanai, guess what it says in the Torah? What's the rule? The Maisa is Kayim and the Tanai is Bata. The Maisa works. He wants to get married. Almanas that he has no obligations to his wife. He's married and he has obligations. Ask what shown him. I don't understand. He doesn't want to be married without this. If you want to say that the whole thing is batel, fine. But how can you say it works and he's stuck? He made a t'nai. Why should the Maisa still work? He made a t'nai. So we had 3 ideas. 3 ideas. Number 1 was Tosfos. Tosfos says the whole yesod of t'nai is a chiddush. How can you make a t'nai and a Maisa? You're getting married. You're getting married. Almanas that it rains, almanas something. You're getting married. So the Torah, this week's Parsha, Hashgacha. This week's Parsha, the Torah talks about Tanai, B'nai Gad and B'nai Ruvain. Right? So the Torah is Machadesh Tanai, but if there's a problem with the Tanai falls away. Because the whole institution of Tanai is a Chiddush. So if there's a problem with it, it just falls away. And then we was a mistake. We saw Tosfos in Kiddushin that talks about sometimes things aren't al t'nai, it's just from within. Somebody sells all of his property because he gives away all of his property, doesn't think he has a son, and then his son walks in. His son gets the stuff back. He didn't make it t'nai because that's inherent. That's a mistake. Highlighting the idea of t'nai milsa achrisi. T'nai is really something external. It's an external condition, not an internal limitation. That was the phrasing that we used. So that was all number 1. That was Tosfos. Number 2, we saw Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam says, and the Tosfos Yeshanim says this in Ksubis, well, if somebody makes a Tanai against what it says in the Torah, they're obviously joking. They obviously don't mean it. It's like making a Tanai that you're going to fly up to the moon. Okay, you don't mean it. So that's why the Tanai falls away. Because if you make a Tanai against what it says in the Torah, he obviously doesn't mean it. So we said, is this like a hashkafic Rabbeinu Tam? Like every Jew wants to do the right thing, and therefore we don't have to take him seriously? Maybe. We weren't sure if it was automatic or it was just really, what if he's screaming, and I mean it? My pashtus is, the Rabbeinu Tam says, no, he doesn't have that power. Good. And finally, number 3, the Ramban. The Ramban seems to say you can't make a t'nai against the Torah, against what the Torah says. Why? It relates to approach number 1, but it's separate also. You can't make a t'nai that's anti-definitional to the Maisa that you're doing. You're doing a Maisa, and then you make a t'nai. So you can make a t'nai to add on. But if your t'nai is undermining your Maisa from the beginning, married, almanas that it rains. Rain has nothing to do with marriage. But a t'nai about not obligating to your wife, that's not marriage. You can't make a t'nai against what you're trying to do. Right? A t'nai has to be milsa achrisi. And if it's not milsa achrisi, then it doesn't work. And just the Maisa stance. That was an important yesod of the Ramban. But that was all a t'nai against what it said. Then we went on to the next topic about what about a t'nai to try to fulfill the Torah, a t'nai in the world of mitzvos. Could you make a t'nai? Could you do a mitzvah al t'nai? So we said, seems yes, right? Somebody's davening early, they can count Sfir Sa'omer al t'nai. Right? If somebody's not sure if they're going to make Zman Kriya Shema, they say it beforehand al t'nai. Or the famous Avnei Nezer. The Avnei Nezer that if somebody's right before Chatzos on the Seder night, eat a kazayas, then wait till Chatzos, then do everything else, then eat a kazayas again at the end, and do it al t'nai is the halacha like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, like Rabbi Akiva. So we see a lot of examples of mitzvahs al t'nai. What's the problem? The problem is the Gemara in Ksubis, Daf Ayin Daled, which says that there's a connection between shlichus and t'nai. Whatever you can make a shliach on, you can make a t'nai on, and vice versa. Why? Tosus, one word, bailus. Bailus, because any action that you're in control of, you can make a shliach and you can make a t'nai on. You're not the bailam on mitzvos. You can't make a shliach for mitzvos, so how can you make a t'nai on mitzvos? How can you do mitzvos al t'nai? You're not the bailam on mitzvos. So we had three answers to that question. Number one, that was the Chassam Sofer. Well, you can make a t'nai, you could do certain mitzvahs with a shliach. So if you could do certain mitzvahs with a shliach, then the rule is that mitzvahs can have a t'nai, even though certain mitzvahs you can't do through a shliach. Because some mitzvahs can be done through a shliach, so all mitzvahs are okay, or not a violation. That was one. That was the Chassam Sofer. We also saw the Tshuvas Oneg Yantif, the Lumdis, the Oneg Yantif. Oneg Yantif, who was the chalik between, if you could do a Maisa with a Shliach, that means that your Ratzon plays a role. Because he's doing it and I want it done. If I have to do it myself, that means my Ratzon doesn't make a difference. It's just a physical act that has to take place. But whenever your Ratzon plays a role, that's when you can make a Shliach on. Because you could appoint a Shliach. So mitzvos always has to do with your Ratzon. Rav Asher Weiss uses that, Oneg Yantif, in our category, in our context. Mitzvahs are always dependent on your Ratzon and Kavanah. So therefore, even though you can't do it through a Shliach, but the ingredient that is important is there. And that is really the Ratzon. Right? You can read my notes I fleshed it out a little bit more. But one final point we mentioned, and with this we'll stop, and that is, maybe you're really not bailam on mitzvahs, but these t'naim are different. What do all of these t'naim have in common? They're all t'naim to try to fulfill a mitzvah. You can't make a t'nai on a mitzvah stam that has nothing to do with the mitzvah. But maybe part of doing a mitzvah, Hashem allows you. You want to do matzah and daven and kriya shema. These types of time are allowed because this is part of doing the mitzvah. This is part of what Hashem wants you to do. You can't shake a lulav almanas something. But anytime you're trying to do a mitzvah, then it is not a problem. So again, just like masna mashakaza b'Torah doesn't work, masna l'kayim b'Torah does work. You're trying to do the mitzvah, and therefore Hashem would allow you to do it.